Dave Clancy, welcome to the Pacey Performance Podcast. It's a pleasure and honour to have you.
Cheers, Rob. Yeah, it's been a while. Really looking forward to having a conversation with you today. We had a nice little chat there this morning, so looking forward to building on that.
Absolutely. And we've never met in person, have we?
No, we have not.
Have we?
We've spoken on Zoom many a time, but not in person yet.
And no, you're a big guy. So I can't see the stature when you sat down. 6'5", 6'6"?
6'5" with a bit if the hair is up, yeah, to
Okay.
cover the forehead.
With a bit
But
of
yeah,
VAT, yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
6'5", yeah, kind of posture's important, and it served me well in Irish basketball. But when I played with the States, I was very small.
Yeah, understood. If anyone doesn't know who you are, would you mind just giving us a brief intro to you, and then we'll dive into some of the more recent stuff that you've been doing around recruitment and do you call it recruitment? Executive search?
We call it recruitment,
Okay,
yeah,
perfect.
yeah, yeah.
Let's go back. Bring us forward.
Let's go back. Suppose we start with sports medicine is my thing, right? Physiotherapy is kind of where I started this journey into healthcare, performance, whatever you want to call it. Um, Interested in all different realms of healthcare, Rob. So I mean, I was interested in medicine, I was interested in psychology, I was interested in physio. But physio is where I really focused and specialized and experienced in Ireland. From everything from League of Ireland football back in the day, 15 years ago, to Pitside rugby, to loads of different private practices. Made my way over to London, working with Isaac Kinetic, and then been back in Dublin now for 5.5 years, and tried lots of different ventures in the business world. Explored that quite a lot, and also followed my curiosities to a couple of other different things like podcasts, which you were on mine before, right, and a couple of other things. So yeah, last couple of years really looked a lot more around personal development of the staff at teams, and also recruitment, and they're the kind of two areas that I'm really interested in at the moment.
Talk to us about the recruitment world because I don't know whether I've seen it a little bit from the people that we spoke about before who were in there as well.
Yeah,
There's a lot of people in it or trying to do it, is my perception,
yeah.
and it's friggin' ruthless. And it's
As it
all consuming.
as in the
Everything.
industry.
The industry. Yes. Would I be right on that or not?
It's a funny thing. Like in my world, in our world, we're obviously trying to build relationships with our clients, the teams, the clubs, the franchises, the organizations, the buyers. But at the same time, you spend a lot of your time speaking to the people that are trying to navigate or understand what their next move could look like. So it's really interesting, those two worlds, and they're very different. And sometimes the conversations are very similar, and sometimes they're extremely different. I suppose what we would say is, yeah, it's a competitive world, but there's not loads of us that do it. I mean, we like to think our group is pretty nichey in that we're pretty specific with who we speak to and the work we try to do. And was some of the other companies in this industry of recruitment or headhunting probably target slightly different markets or different people to place, that's probably where we like to play different. But it's a competitive world, I just say, because high performance sport, right? As much as people love to say they're friends and it's all about collaboration, relationships, and getting on, ultimately people want to do well, and it's a dog eat dog world. So when you're having those conversations, people want to do well in their career. So that's a huge part of it, which is really interesting.
How do you feel about how people engage with you now I'm assuming now they know that you can potentially get them a step up in their career. Do you think everything that's changed? Do you think that's changed over the years?
Yeah, it's a good question, and and I'm
Are you
smiling
aware of that?
because
You obviously are.
totally aware of it.
Yeah.
And, people I would have spoken to that I work beside, like Mike and Richard, who've got more skin in the game and been around this world more than I have, would have said the same thing to me early when I really leaned into this a few years ago as, David, you're going to have more friends overnight. And Rob, it's funny. It's a funny thing to say, but kind of it's such a difficult one because a lot of more people would reach out to me, and trying to understand how much of it is a genuine reach out friendship build or actually I want to have a conversation because what's going on in the pipeline from teams, I want to get a move. And so there's nuance to that, but it's definitely something that, I'm really mindful of, that when people want to talk, a majority of people want to kind of try to find what's out there and get another move. It's a hard one.
Talk to us about Next Level Group. What is Next Level Group?
It's a group of people, a tight team that work with pro sports teams, mostly in the States and the UK, a couple of other teams outside those continents, placing medical and performance staff. So we like to say we build the team behind the team. Of course, that's not HR, that's not front office. We really are specialized in terms of the medical staff and the performance staff. And so Next Level Group really is about recruitment and helping facilitate people to move to a team through a methodology and a process. Sometimes when the people are there and there's a good thing going, it might be more of an education play or a bit more of a development as to the people that are already there. But definitely the lion's share of our work now and kind of where our reputation is growing is placing good people at teams or clubs where they can do some real meaningful good work. That's what we do.
Do you find that a lot of your time is you going out to people to get to know the market of who's out there, should something come up or it has come up? Or the other way around, where people are coming to you, like we said before, potentially genuine outreach to build a relationship or potentially just to get a job?
Probably both.
Okay.
And I think the balance changes and it's somewhat seasonal. But I mean, I would be pretty purposeful in terms of who I want to reach out to because I want to understand. I've heard that they're doing great work. I want to ask them what's that great work they're doing. Or if I understand something's happening at an organization or a team level, who's the person to have a conversation with to understand what that looks like. So I do a lot of that. But on the flip side, 10 people a day could be reaching out to me trying to spend, like you, trying to spend time with you and really ask the question as to, well, everything's good where I am, but, if anything comes up, keep me in mind. And those conversations are interesting because obviously it's a show and tell and we're both trying to understand what's going on. For me, I always try to draw insights and ask questions as to where do you want to go? What's going on where you are? What's the dynamic like at that environment? Because if that person does move, we whether we've had a place in it or not, it's also interesting to understand what's happened, why did they move, and what's going on at that team. So I think a huge part of my work is really trying to understand the landscapes of different clubs and teams and the workings around them. I think that's a huge part of where I'm really trying to understand and read up into it at the moment.
Having had lots of them outreach or people coming to you, reach out to you, how would you recommend people approach that based on the good, the bad and the ugly from what I'm guessing you've had?
I said it recently and it's such an easy thing to say, but I keep thinking of people like Jack Butcher, David Hyatt, guys that I've studied and spent time with, and you as well, Rob, with your platform. I love it when people give something first, right? And it sounds obvious, and anyone that has a newsletter can attest to that. When you build proximity in relationships, when you front load on value before ask or sell. What definitely irks me or frustrates me is when people who I don't know at all from any, don't even know you, don't know anything about you personally, and it's just a real cold DM. Can we jump on a call? And it's, about what? Hello, how are you? Not even like, hi, David. And I do get that. And that's the ugly. But definitely, somebody who spoke to me yesterday and it was through LinkedIn, and it was a wonderful conversation. It was really cool. But he said, I read something that you put up recently. I thought it was really interesting. Actually, I put something out there recently. It'd be great to talk through it. And I was like, yeah, that was great. Because we had a really good conversation because we were just sharing. And now, we want to help each other. So I think more of that, obviously, is a win.
Just talking about employers that you work with or have worked with
Yeah.
in the past. And let's separate this out, performance and medical, because there might be slightly different wants and needs here. And it's quite a general question, but what are they actually looking from a performance perspective? Let's go performance. What are they looking for from the people that they're potentially going to employ via Next Level?
More often than not, they're looking for the people that they know can do the job to a really high level. It sounds really obvious, but there's a lot of truth to that. Now, sometimes we like to disrupt that thinking and get that GM or sporting director or performance director to think different. Have you considered this? Or what about this approach? Or this person from another sport? Those conversations, more often than not, from our track record, have been pretty fruitful when it's been a bit of an outside perspective and we have earned the trust of that person so we can have that conversation. But I would think more often than not, when we're speaking to a team and we're tasked with finding people through a search, they kind of know what they're looking for because they know what they've had and it hasn't worked, and they've identified it hasn't worked for a variety of different reasons. And so they're obviously trying to find someone who maybe has other attributes or other skills or something that's been lacking in that department. And that usually marries up with what is like an inclusion criteria on a job spec. You know, that we've had an issue with this, and this, and all of a sudden that becomes really critical for the person that we're trying to find. So what's really important is when we're building that initial engagement or relationship with a team, there's a lot of conversations and there's time spent on the ground in person with that team to understand what the environment is, to understand the people there, but to understand kind of what they've had over the years traditionally and kind of what could they be looking for. And Rob, I'll just pause on this too. I think we like to ask them questions, that client, that technical director, the GM, whoever it is, you know, the questions that maybe they haven't thought about asking of themselves, that could be good questions for them to consider when we're looking for people. And that obviously, again, will help us think about the people that could be placed there. If that makes sense.
Absolutely. Before I follow up on that, I think the process of a search definitely will be of interest to listeners.
Yeah.
Will you take us through that process, however brief you want to make it?
Yeah, so say for argument's sake, it's happened this week. So a team will reach out to us and we're looking for a first team doctor or a new head of performance science. So usually where we start, you know, of course we'll send over terms of and we'll send over a system process, but really what it looks like is initially it starts with a co-creation of a job spec, role description, the nuts and bolts from everything from education to background to personal pieces that make someone look different, right the way through to technical pieces we need to understand, leadership qualities, dynamics of a department. So that's really important, right? And you're building that ultimately with the key stakeholders at a club, HR, people, culture, sporting directors, whoever's really signing it off. And there's usually 2 or 3 from a team and then our side. And when you kind of have that, you have your blueprint as to who the people kind of are. Our next step then is to be really fine-tuned on who is probably excluded from that, from a search. And that could be, as an example, we need 6 to 10 years of experience in elite football. If you don't have that, it's hard to filter in, right? So you kind of get a really clear, there's some gray, but a pretty clear delineation of inclusion criteria, exclusion criteria off the job spec. And then we get going, right? So when we kind of know our markets and sports and where we can look, and there's a lot of factors that play a role in that, can we bake out a long list? So a long list is, you know, putting 15 to 20 down on names from our database, from our network, who we know, who we've spoken to in the last 6 to 12 months, who's been recommended, where we've heard good things from. And kind of when we get to that, you want to get a bit of feedback. So obviously there's a lot of communication back and forth with a club through this whole piece, right? But you really want to get to a short list for the position of 3 to 5 or 6 really strong, high potential candidates that you feel could do it, could do the job, tick all the boxes, it's a good fit, culture, personal, professional attributes. And then it really comes to interviews, online, in person. Ultimately, you get to the point after 5 to 6 to 7 weeks, can be longer, depends on the caliber of the role and the specificity around it. Could be 3 months, could be 4 months, could be longer if it's a really big role. But you get to the point when there's 1, 2, 3 people, and it's that thing that they're probably all really, really good, and ultimately it's a personality fit with the team. After they visited, they get a good sense or a good feeling. And last thing, Rob, really is when you get to that, you're vetting, you're qualifying, you're asking for where they've worked before, you're asking for people that, they might know you're going to have asked for. What did you think of that person? Or so you're really trying to get 360 feedback as to what would that person be like to work with. And then ultimately you get to the person, and it's an offer, onboarding. And just two things that I think are interesting, Rob, for listeners too. When you get to that point when an offer is made, a formal offer, and we've given a really good sense as to salary expectations, duration of a contract, what it needs to look like for geographical moves or family dynamics, they don't always accept. Now, most of the time they do, but like 1 to 2 out of 10, it doesn't quite work for the timing, or the money's not quite right, or the incentives or bonuses aren't quite right, or they've read something recently in the press and it sometimes can fall at the last hurdle. It's very rare. And I suppose the other thing I'd add too is what's really important is if someone is placed at a team or a club, we want to follow up. And, our group in particular take great pride in that, because we've seen where someone has gone somewhere and you've done all the work and the process has been rigorous and there's been thinking behind it, but still there's 1 or 2 out of 10 where it doesn't quite work. And kind of when you're doing your after action 3, 4, 5 months later, why? And I think that's really interesting, and there's been lessons for us over the years from that. But again, more often than not, when we go to visit a club, once or twice later over the subsequent season, it usually has been a good fit, because we've really tried to front load on understanding the people, the culture, vision, and having that alignment. So that's kind of what it looks like.
We spoke about this a little bit before, and you've touched on it. How much development, as in personal development, professional development, goes on once that person is placed? Yes, you'll feedback to see how it's going, but how much kind of continuing touch points for that person and that organisation actually is there?
From us?
From you. Yeah, from you. As in, do you continue for 12 months to kind of educate this person and kind of guide their development? Or is it just, right, you're in, we'll feedback, we want to know how it goes, but we're kind of done from here?
No, it's a good question. I would say it's not part of our traditional terms of business, right? We don't get paid for it, but it's absolutely critical. Not everyone wants that, right? So you ask those questions, or at least from spending enough time and having conversations with the people or that person, be that the candidate who was placed or be it the team, how much ongoing support or education do they need? Now, as an example, say if someone's gone into a role in a different sport, okay, in a more senior position. So there's a bit more to that now. There's a bit to that, that's quite a step for someone. I think it's important to have those conversations with that person, behind closed doors, even relatively speaking. How are you doing? How's everything? Is there anything we can help on? Because we want that to work, right? So, as much as it's not part of a 6-month ongoing contract, we want it to work. And if we are hearing, or if that person is saying, I think I need to really nail that, or I need to have a bit more of that, well, we have to help facilitate that, because we want it to work. We want the team to feel like they got the right person. So that's something that we definitely have our feelers up for. And I think it's definitely when people have moved to more senior roles, head of department roles, or they've transitioned into a sport that's new for them. So there's a that whole thing about expectation and what does a club expect of someone, and what's the person think of going into a new environment. So I think the ongoing education, having those questions and just keeping in touch is really important.
Just going back about 10 minutes around them kind of performance and medical and what the employers are actually looking for. When it comes to education, you look at sometimes the not most basic, but kind of middle of the road job title. And the expectation of education is just going and going and going. From, I'm guessing back in the day, everyone was looking for a degree, then it became an MSc, and now it seems like every Tom, Dick and Harry wants a PhD. From an employer's perspective, and your perspective, because you're going through these people, what weight do you actually put on that? And does that differ from kind of state of the role and level of the role? Or do you have a particular perspective on education as a whole of where that's placed in the hierarchy of importance?
For a team?
Yeah, I suppose so. I mean, it'd be nice to get your perspective as well, but as well as the employer and the team, what value are they putting on? Like, if, for example, the head of sports science and medicine at a elite club, whatever sport that may be, if that person's not got a PhD, we're done. Like, no way. Yeah. Or are you like, I get it, like it's got to be on the criteria to say they need a PhD, but personally, like, if he's got an MSc, it's okay. What's your thoughts on just the hierarchy of education, of where it sits and the importance of hiring?
I think it's a grey area, and I think it really depends on the person at the team. Okay. So, if that's a conversation with HR and people, the conversation might go one way. If it's a conversation with a performance director, head of performance, who's head of department, or an assistant GM or assistant technical director, the conversation could go another way. We've been involved in processes where it's been, clearly articulated from the start, we want someone with a bare minimum of this. So yes, there's guard posts, there's guardrails to that. So when we're getting to 12 to 15 people, there might be one or two that don't have it. But you'd include them. But you'd make it clear as to why you've included them. So if someone doesn't have a PhD, because I don't have a PhD, but a lot of people do have a PhD now, why would you have included that person if they didn't have a PhD? And I think that's really interesting. And we would have definitely broached that subject with, like I said, you're going for that elite head of sports science role at a Premier League soccer club. We want someone with football. We want someone with the higher pedigrees, worked in the Premier League for a decade. And we will go, we got you. That's in the job spec. That's in the inclusion criteria. 11 out of 12 have it. We're including this person who doesn't. This is why. And I think if we are confident in articulating why and why this person should be included, if we have enough confidence in that, then we do. But I think it's really interesting. I think what jumps out to me when you're looking through CVs and resumes, which we do all the time, is, yes, having that thorough depth of, let's call it traditional education, helps for sure, right? Call it a separator if you want. But I think the people that are definitely nurturing their professional desires to keep learning, so that's something that we also look at. So if you've just gone into a role and you've been working and busy, as we all are, for 6 years, but you're not attending or doing as much from an education perspective, maybe because there's more demands on your role, more expectation, you have less time, you now have a family. It's just a question to ask. You're not attending as much, or when's the last time you did your ultrasound course, or, how are you, do you still kind of have that kind of build of your network? I think those are always very interesting questions, because we like exploring the people that are curious, open-minded, not everyone has a beginner's mindset, but kind of that sort of black belt, white belt, kind of that have the swagger and confidence that can walk in and do the job, but also that humility. I think when you kind of get that balance, you find gold. So people that are continuously nurturing and learning and looking, and I think another thing that's really interesting for us is when we're building our profiles of our candidates, a lot of the time when you're looking for those caliber of roles, Rob, middle to senior at a team, there's a lot of good people. It's so hard to separate the competition because, there might be one role or two roles and it's May or it's April and there's 50 people gunning for it. And they've all got the masters and the PhD, and they've all been to Loughborough, and they've all done Sportsmith Premium, and they've all done all that stuff. We would always go back to those people and say, give us the 3 or 4 or 5 things that make you really pop and make you really different. And that can be totally professional, or it could be something personal, but something that makes you unique. Like, what's your unique proposition? How are you different? Because I think when we're having those conversations, we need to really understand the people, and because again, the level and the expectation and the standards are just getting better and better. So how do you start to separate people, especially when you're going to have more fruitful conversations with them?
So many questions off the back of that. Have you got any examples of answers when you've said, how are you different? What makes you unique?
Yeah, it's such a hard, because people go, I get a lot of friction with that, and people come back to me and go, you say that, and I sometimes hear, because people might talk to my personal situation, right? Like, you put that on your deck. No, that's not what I mean at all. As an example, I spoke to someone recently at an Eredivisie team. Didn't know him, didn't know much about their club, and we had a really good conversation. And he's like, I'm thinking of moving in the summer. I've been here for a few years, and what do you think? And so we spoke around clarity as to where you want to go, and why is moving a good move for you now? Like, why now? What are the reasons that have come to that, have made you think of this as a decision? Then we think of positioning for success. So kind of, how are you bringing yourself to market? How are you increasing your visibility? Is it reaching out to me and our group, or is it putting content out there? Or how are you engaging with people that are trying to find you and place you? And then we went to that question. I kind of went, you know what I'd love you to do? I'd love you to come back to me in 7 to 10 days when you've thought about it, and think about what you've achieved and built, system-wise, philosophically-wise, what didn't go so well, but you recovered and you integrated this. From a people leadership perspective, you did this. Think about 3 or 4 or 5 things you did that you're proud of that make you look a little different. I don't even know the Dutch league, so educate me on it. And I remember the conversation, Rob, and he was like, that's a good question. But he came back to me on WhatsApp with he had thought about it and the insights he gave me. So, I mean, he thought, he put down something like, and it was more to than a return to play protocol. He thought about like a philosophy with the coaches and the performance staff that he had brought to the first team coach. He talked about a system of communication from the academy to the first team and how they had integrated it and kind of what that looked like. And I was like, really good. So he had thought about this now. And then I went back to him and said, make it into 1 line or 2 lines so that it can go on a PowerPoint on 3 bullet points. And he kind of got it. And so now when I look at his profile in our database, I look at his education, I look at his pedigree, where he's worked, where he's had exposure, where he's been geographically, what are his personal circumstances, how his job has changed. But I will look at those 3 or 4 USPs and kind of go, he's done two things that are pretty special and actually really befitting of that role that we're looking for over there. Let's have that conversation. So I think it's worth people thinking about, because otherwise you end up thinking, I've been in a sports science role for 11 years in 3 different clubs, but so have other people. But what have you done what have you done? Like, what did you do in the job and in the role that was really good, that was really interesting, that would spark a conversation or a good question?
one topic that I like to bring up in these kind of recruitment, career development conversations is around accreditations.
Yeah.
What value, especially on your career, I think you put a lot of value on them kind of things.
Yeah, you do.
And maybe as you go up the chain, but people give less and less of a shit about that kind of thing. Should it be like that? Is it like that? From a recruitment perspective, I mean, I know you're dealing at the higher end in terms of director of, head of. You're not going through this search for an assistant S&C coach. But for the listener who maybe is at that point, what would your recommendations, what are your thoughts around accreditation and employers' knowledge of them, interest in them when hiring on a performance side?
I think we know what they are, right? Because we spend enough time chatting to S&C, sports science, performance directors to understand, especially in the States, like from a CEU perspective, continuous professional development, that's really important, right? If you're attending something, you get the points. Now, I did loads of that when I was starting off, right? So I that really resonated with me, what you said too. Like when you're working a while, does everyone still have their HCPC, their CSP, all those sort of things? In my world, there's definitely a time when it's a prerequisite, it's a must-have, right? So if it's a first-team doctor, GMC registered, do you have it? Like Sempris, do you have it? Like if you don't, you need to have it, because if you're wanting to work in the Premier League and you're a doctor and you're coming from Spain and you're not registered, it's hard to work. So there's that. I definitely think early on in your career, even today in 2025, I think you should probably know what you should have and think about it. And I mean, early on in my career, I did UKSCA, right? I went up to Manchester, went to the Velodrome. I wanted to understand that, and I made sure I had my certification. So I think you should definitely know that if you're applying for a role, look for what you should have. It sounds really basic, but again, something that will frustrate us is when people are applying for roles on our jobs board that we put on our newsletter every Friday, and like they're not all jobs we're actively searching in, but we know like Job Sports Job, Training Ground Guru, there's all these jobs out there. And what we hear a lot is people who are applying for jobs at any sort of stage of their career, but they don't have everything they should have from a certification perspective. I didn't do my ALS or BLS or I didn't do, or BASM or whatever it is. Like, do your homework. And yes, not every employer is really going to look with a fine tooth comb if you have maybe what you should have, but you should probably have looked and be willing to be able to stand up to the question if it's asked. So, I mean, I couldn't actually probably tell you how many sports scientists that are going for a role tomorrow have, from an accreditation perspective, what they should have to work, but they should know. They should know. And I think that's, like, if you apply for something and you say you have what they're looking for and you don't, that's a problem. And like, we've seen that. I know if you're willing to try it, all well for it. A lot of us do that a lot of the time still. But I think, I would just be prepared and ask questions of people that might know in the industry. Like, have the questions. Reach out to people and say, I'm going for this role. Do you think I need this and this and this? I can't find it on their HR portal. What are you thinking? So yeah, that's what comes to mind.
Just bridging that gap between the performance and medical side.
Yeah.
From a characteristic personality, I know this is going to differ based on the culture and all that kind of stuff, but is there anything general from both sides that you're getting that's quite common from an organisation? Dave, whether a doctor, they're a sports scientist, they're a director of whatever, this person's got to be this in terms of character.
The stuff that really is coming up more and more often is people that can handle pressure, people that can handle stress. Those are questions that are asked in interviews. They're questions that are explored. Like, they're the curveballs.
How do you even understand that?
Because when you ask people questions about scenarios, okay, or you give someone You give someone, as part of an interview process, you've made it through to the interview now. Congratulations. There's these 3 tasks in these 3 different rooms that you're going to go through. But there's a blind task which you'll find out an hour before it or the day of. How do those people manage and cope with that? No, like, that's hard for everyone. But can people, remain logical, methodological, calm, cool, collected, not overly flustered, blue head? You're looking for those kind of people, right? If you're seeing people are getting flustered and hot under the collar, you're kind of going, what about a high stakes environment when there's demands on you from a player and a manager? How are you going to do there? So I think attributes that cross over performance in medicine, you're trying to understand, firstly, are they good people? That balance between ego, confidence, humility, where's that level of trust? Is this person someone you could work with? Do they say I or do they say we? Do they speak well of where they worked and who they worked with, or do they speak different? You can listen and hear a lot of that, so how they speak of where they've worked or where they currently still are working, even if they're being fired, tells a lot about attributes and character and integrity. So I think that sort of stuff is critical on either side. And then the stuff we start to see and hear is people that are logical. Sounds obvious, right? Logical, pretty direct, exacting, know what they're doing, deliberate, intentional. Those are the kind of things you're looking for, and you're trying to understand from people. You're trying to understand. One that comes up, Rob, often is, do you think this person's a leader? Could they lead a department? This person was a sports scientist, now they're head sports scientist, first team performance director, big jump. More of a leadership demand, however you want to define and unpack that. It's always a hard one, right? Because everyone's been a leader at some point in time, and there's always examples of leadership, but you're trying to pull that and try to bring that out from someone. So I think that's something you're looking for people at all levels, that there's that quality of bringing people with you on your journey, no matter where you are, that it's not just about you too,
When you're going through this process, I know you mentioned this kind of maybe comes at the end, but what value do you put on recommendations, on references? Do you do that as the process goes on? Are you having those discussions with, what's this guy like? You've worked with him before, you've worked with him 5 years, what's he actually like? How much of a pull does that, either way, how much of a pull do those recommendations, references get?
I'm kind of shifting here because that's real life, and that's kind of hits me in the heart. It's a real thing, so if someone's going for a role and we have a bias for that person, we're humans, right? So as much as you try to be objective, there's some subjectivity there. There's a warmth to certain people, and maybe there's history. And say even if there's a warmth and alignment with the prospective team. So now the recruiter likes the person, the team likes the person, and then, like what I said a few minutes ago, Rob, at that last stage of the hurdle, you're getting that 360. So where did that person work before? Who did they work beside? Who are the people there that would probably be really candid and tell you the truth, that they weren't friends? And I would assume if you're the team or a client, it's really hard to not listen to that and not be swayed and influenced by it, because as much as you might like the person and think they can do it, as much as we might recommend that person and it's been triangulated, if someone's worked with someone for 5 years before it and there's questions or there's something to consider or there's something that we haven't thought about, you have to bring it into the table. You have to ask the prospective candidate, did that ever come up before? What are your thoughts on that? Or we've heard that this happened previously. How did you manage that? Or like, how does that make you think now? Or how would you approach this differently? So I think what's interesting with that too is you can get feedback and you can get referrals and recommendations. Now they could be 18 months ago or 5 years ago or 3 weeks ago. Everyone changes. And usually most people learn from lessons and mistakes. If they don't, they're not at this point, right? But you'd like to think that you'd ask those questions, either the team or us, how would you do it differently? And if that person has shown growth and that they've understood maybe a mistake or something that didn't quite go to plan, but they'd approach it differently now, well, that's growth. And that's humility. And it shows that this person doesn't know it all, but is willing to say that. And I think there's a huge strength to that. So I think that's kind of where I would take that. But it's real. It's a huge part when people put in CVs. Everyone has their 3 or 4 referees, their references. We do talk to them, for sure we do, and we talk to more people because you want to get plenty of examples and testaments, and you want to get the good, the bad, and the ugly, but you take it with a pinch of salt. And I think it's that conversation that you have about would you do it differently or how would you manage it now. I think they're good questions to ask.
It's difficult. Amazon reviews, TripAdvisor reviews, going for out for a meal, 100 positive ones, but if the last one was a 3-star, it's gone downhill. It's difficult not to be swayed by that, isn't it?
Very hard. And it happened to us really recently with someone that was right there, and for all the reasons that person was number one, and something was said and wow, it paused it all. The person would probably be okay, but it stopped the train in its tracks abruptly. So like you said, it doesn't even have to be a 3-star. But if everyone's getting 5s, and like we said, the 3 at the end are all stars, and someone gets a 4 from a previous employer, it's a wrench in it, and it's really hard to get around it, but it's kind of the nature of it too, it happens. I'm sure if I worked in Isaac Kinetic, and you probably asked 10 people what was David like to work with, and 7 people would say he was great, and 2 or 3 people would say he was really hard to work with. So how was that for my next employer? So it's real, it happens. Not everyone likes everyone.
Next door just decided to destroy their garden and make lots of noise, so apologies if that's coming through on the mic. One last question I'll ask you, and you've done some work in this area, and we have in the past as well, around salaries. And one, I suppose, complaint of performance coaches, no matter what the level, is always around crap salaries.
Not getting paid well enough.
Not getting paid well enough. Is that changing? Why do you think that is? And just to get your, the industry, what's going on from a employer perspective, just to get your thoughts around that whole area.
Yeah, obviously kudos to you, Rob. You've looked into that, and you've tried to educate and kind of level the playing field. We're currently undertaking a couple more R&D pieces around that, just again for transparency, so that people understand, be it in medical or performance, expectations and maybe what you could look and ask for, knowing that everyone else in the league is getting this or this other sport is getting that. I think, generally speaking, salaries are going up across the board. You'd probably say it for the majority of roles. Teams or clients are more open to those conversations, that this person's expecting 20k more, or this person wants this now because of these reasons.
Is this just the higher end, Dave, or do you think that's filtering down as well?
Well, I was going to come to it now. Sorry. I think if you're talking lower, and even because it's real life as well, S&C Sports Science recently could be a little bit better, is all I'd say. So I think, however you want to, you're smiling there, but that's why we're going to look into it a little bit. But I mean, I had a couple of conversations with people in that world that weren't head of at all. League One, Champ, Prem, teams around Europe. And I remember when I heard, I went, oh, really? Okay. I didn't say, I thought you'd have been earning more, but I did. I kind of thought you might be earning more. But there's always, it's definitely an education space for us to try to understand it more. I think that what we need to do is have, we need to have a little bit more of a a market for people trying to have those conversations, that people going into roles in football or whatever sport, or people trying to progress in their career, at least know with a little bit more confidence behind their back that I should be getting 45 for this. I should be getting 60,000 for that. I mean, and just being able to say with a little bit of certainty that I think, over half of the league, people in a similar position are getting this. If you can at least bring that to a conversation, it helps you. Because, yeah, I probably agree with you. I think people, and there's an asterisk to certain people at the top, but salaries could probably go up for people towards the lower end. And even when you look at what's out there in terms of job boards, when you look at them, there's such a variance and the spectrum is so wide. But when you look at certain roles, you're going, really? Like at that team, championship level, like, could you not get more? But I think it's such a hard one for prospective candidates or people already embedded in a role to navigate to get 10k more or 5k more, or think they should be deserving of more because their friend at the other club up the road is getting more. But it's definitely something we hear more. It's definitely something we hear more, and people are, as much as people don't like talking about money, it's definitely, it does come up in conversations more than it probably used to.
That was what you've just described there is exactly why I wanted to do the surveys. Not to say this is good, not to say this is bad, but just to say this is what it is. You take it, you use it for whatever you want. Leverage, keep your head down because you're actually getting paid more than everyone else. Yeah. So don't say anything. But just to open up increase transparency.
And I think, like, again to that, we haven't only put head of medical first team doctor, we put other roles in, right? And when we're looking at other roles in the States and in Europe, and you're putting down on our process those sheets with the education, work experience, where they've been, those 3 or 4 USPs, what makes them tick, you try to put current salary, you've asked the question, salary expectation, and then, what are the team looking to pay? And what's just been illuminating at every search we've done is there's such a difference. So when you found the 10 people or the 12 people that match the job spec, that fit your criteria, you've had the one person that doesn't have the PhD, they're all there, and some people are getting 120, some people are getting 100, some person getting 60, so there's, I think what you're saying is massively still, it's an uneducated, on-level field that I think the more people that we can have, be it you, be it us, whoever, that can just go, this is what's kind of going on, take what you want with that. And I mean, some of the conversations we've had with European football clubs have been around that, that what do they earn over in the UK? Because it's very different to here, I've been told. And we'd love to be able to say with absolute certainty, or a little bit more certainty, that, you're miles off. You should be able to earn way more than that. Here's some paper that can help with that, if you want.
Amazing. Right. Yeah. We've gone for 50 minutes. So thank you very much for your insights. I think it's super valuable that people in this growing area of recruitment, I think it's super interesting for the listener to just understand that whole process, because it's happening more and more that people are getting a phone call or they're making the phone call. So I appreciate it. If people want to get to know about... Go on.
I was just going to say to that, we get asked sometimes, happened yesterday, twice, are we agents for people, right? We're not, right? And we know there's other groups that are agents for potential candidates to get roles, whatever sort of level. But you know what I'd say, and it's an open invitation before maybe even speak to, like, where can people find more about you? Reach out to our group. We put it in our newsletter every week. I'm pretty open. Like, we share stuff on LinkedIn. We want to understand people and what makes people tick and why people are interested in career moves or positioning themselves for success. So I would just, I didn't want to jump over you, but I would just say, as much as I said, reach out with something, yeah, do. Like, don't just go, hi Dave, can we jump on a call tomorrow? Like, without a intro. But we really want to understand what everyone's doing and understand where people are going, because we want to help. Like, it's a passion area for me that when people go somewhere and they're really happy and you can tell it's a win-win and it's working, that's success. Like, I get huge energy from that. And whether we get money for it or not, it's absolutely cool. It's a great thing. That's why I'm in this world. So just wanted to say that.
Of course. You mentioned the newsletter. Where can people get that?
Yeah, it's called the Playbook. So if you go on to nextlevelgroup.com, you'll see a sign up there. We've got some resources on there, some stuff we've done with leaders in sport and some other blog pieces. But if you go there, it comes out Fridays, coming out in an hour. But I think it's a good one, because we've got the job boards there, job lists globally, as much as we can find, and not all searches we're conducting it, but searches that are out there at any sort of level, any sort of sport, any sort of continent. So if people are just curious what's out there, we try to pool what's out there and put it in one space. And then we always put something around learning and development and something around a good article or a good piece of work someone's doing. So we call that the huddle. We kind of like to shine a light on Kate Young, who's doing some interesting work over in Asia or whatever it is, you know.
Amazing. Well, I'll link to that in the show notes and things so people can get that easy access to that. But it seems pretty simple. So, Dave, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure to chat.
Yeah,
and I'm interested to see where this goes.
Yeah. Me too. Yeah, it's. I would just say, like, if people are trying to think about a move or their next job, actually think about it. Ask yourself the question and kind of look at where you are and what you've achieved to date and what you're doing and why you want to go now and where you want to go, and think about it. And is it a title? Is it a different sport? What are the reasons that are giving you that urge to move? And how can you create more proximity to it? What do you need to do to help with that? And ask yourself that question. And then I think that's good homework for any of us.
Mm-hmm. Good advice. Thank you very much. Keep in touch.
Yeah, man.
Thanks, mate.
100%. Cheers.